Just looking back at other history of coaches being traded, Sean Payton was just traded for a first and a second.
Right. So that's probably what you get for Bill.
So, I mean, that's not a crazy haul. And Sean Payton obviously won once. Bill Belichick's initial trade from the Jets was one first-round pick. But he's won, 6 Super Bowls since.
But remember, he's still older, so a team might probably only be like, we're not going to give you multiple picks for a guy who's only going to be here for, 2 or 3 years. You probably get a first-round pick for Bill.
But also, you have to put into, the way Brady shifted the quarterback movement and made it more like the NBA, where teams are now selecting their destinations at the end of their career, my guess is the best coaches will do the same. I'm not saying Bill wants to leave here, but, Sean Payton didn't want to keep rebuilding in New Orleans. He wanted a new challenge, and he was let out of his deal to go to Denver and get, the Walmart money. And now you have Bill Belichick here. Clearly, no matter what we say, judging by the currying for PR position, Kraft and Belichick right now are not in a great spot.
I think the difference between if you want to compare Sean Payton and Bill Belichick, though, is age. Sean Payton's 59, so Bill Belichick is still decently older when it comes to that, so there's no chance that Bill Belichick wants to go relocate and kind of build from scratch, even if it's a great team.
But that's the point. He wouldn't be going from scratch. So let's say Jerry Jones, another guy that wants to win again to prove it wasn't all Jimmy's building down in Dallas that won those 3 titles in 4 years, that let's say Matt McCarthy gets fired. Mike McCarthy gets fired, and you bring in Bill Belichick for 2 years. I'm sure Jerry Jones hates picks.
Right.
He'd trade a couple first-round picks, get Bill Belichick in there.
And that's a smart move. And if you're Bill, you're not just going anywhere. Similar to Sean Payton, you're going to look at the quarterback situation and say what you want about Russell Wilson and whether or not he's the same that we've seen. You don't want to go somewhere where you don't have a guy already in place. And so if Bill went to Dallas, you'd have Dak Prescott.
Right. And you'd have, Bill talked about the Taj Mahal at Vegas. I mean, Dallas has got about as good a football facility as you can find. It's, I'm sure, a place. Could you imagine Bill dominating Dallas? He'd have his own steakhouse in a week if he wanted it. I mean,
yeah, and I think coaches realize nowadays, even with Kyle Shanahan, he's starting to find out, if you don't have a quarterback, what are you doing?
Right.
And, don't you think, we talk about people who are on the hot seat. When you say Kyle Shanahan's on the hot seat in San Francisco?
No, absolutely not.
No,
you don't think so?
It's John Lynch that's on the hot seat.
Well, I was with a buddy of mine who lives out there last night, and he says that they're both perfectly safe. He listens to Sports Talk, our 95.7
Shanahan's
The
not
Game.
going anywhere.
Yeah, they're very happy with those two.
All right.
So they are well ensconced in their positions, and I feel like what the issue is here is twofold. One, Mac Jones is not an elite quarterback. Like our elite vodka, which is lovely. But the other issue is that in order to get an elite quarterback, you need to have a either awful season, or you have to spend $60 million a year or $50 million a year. With Bill Belichick as the head coach of your football team, you're never going to be awful. He'll get 7-8 wins out of a team that another coach might get 3 or 4. He's brilliant at that stuff, and I will never, begrudge him that. So you're not going to fall to the bottom,
right?
And you're not going to pay at the top,
right?
So what's that? And your coach doesn't believe you need a great quarterback when you do.
You're stuck in purgatory.
So this is where they are, and
right.
And that's why all this jockeying for position with Robert Kraft saying he's on the hot seat. First of all, you're not going to get a quote better coach, Robert. I mean, you might be able to get a better general manager that's more in tune with accepting and adjusting to the way the game is played today. But I don't see the way out to Caleb Williams the way you have, with Bill Belichick as the coach of your team.
7 wins, you're the 9-10 pick. You'd have to be willing to do what the Carolina Panthers did. You'd have to be willing to trade up to number 1.
But the issue with that, I'll let you finish. The issue with that, Wiggy, is that in a draft where there is an Andrew Luck or a Trevor Lawrence or a Caleb Williams, you're not as able to get to one as you were this year when it was Bryce Young, who's
it was up in the air on who was going to go first for quite a while.
We didn't know how big his feet were, how tall he was. That was a whole to-do. It wasn't a clear-cut, no-brainer, Peyton Manning, John Elway, number 1 pick in the draft.
Right, but remember, the team that's bad, if they already, say the Texans are bad, right? Or Carolina's bad. They already have their quarterbacks. So they're not going to want a Caleb Williams again.
Well, you saw what the Cardinals did when they screwed up with Rose and they took Kyler Murray. If there's a guy I'm telling you, the quarterback is so important.
Right.
That even if they have their guy, then the Texans could trade their guy and then get the next great one.
I mean, there's only been one team who's done that, and that was Arizona.
But I feel like it's the quarterback has reached such a premium in the NFL.
But I'm telling you how to get that quarterback. Right? There's a couple ways you get that quarterback. You either look for the disgruntled one who wants out, like Aaron Rodgers or Lamar Jackson.
I would say suck for Djokovic. I think he's going to be a great star in the NFL.
Or you get in a position where if you only win 7 games and you are now hovering around 10, 9, 8 in that world, now you have to say, okay, who's up there at number 1, and are we willing to trade whatever it takes to get to number 1 to get that guy? And then very similar to what the San Francisco 49ers did. Had one bad year, and then they traded all those picks, moved up, and got Trey Lance.
The issue here, though, is if you find those disgruntled quarterbacks out there, will Bill or Kraft pay them?
Right.
Because the going rate right now, they're not going to. And then if we get a guy that we like, are they going to pay them to extend them?
See, here's where I'll say other coaches, here's the only reason why I would say, okay, maybe you probably contemplate trading Belichick is because is he willing to change his philosophy on those things? Like, I think other coaches in the league have shown, hey, I'll go up to number 1 and get a guy. I'll pay a guy a ton of money. That's the one thing that we're looking at Bill and going, okay, Bill, can you come into this century, the 21st century, we're in the 21st century,
That's correct. Yep.
Right? Can you come into the 21st century in 2023 and do business how business is being done in football? Meaning if you're hovering around 7 and you need a quarterback, are you willing to trade up to number 1 or 2 to get that guy? Or are you willing to pay the disgruntled guy? But based on what the reports were with Aaron Rodgers, it seemed like maybe Bill isn't willing to do that.
What I would say the most likely outcome, sitting here today on the 21st of July, the year of our Lord, is that Bailey Zappi is your starting quarterback next season.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I would agree with you.
Because you have Mac Jones, if he has a great year, which we all hope he does. Vegas doesn't believe it. We'll get to that in a second. Then you have to pick up the 5th year.
Right.
I don't think Mac is going to have a, quote, great year.
Okay.
Maybe he does, and I hope he does, but if he has a great year, they pick up the 5th year option, they buy another year of time.
Right.
But if Mac is what Vegas expects, which is 19.5 touchdown passes, 3,300 yards, and 12 picks, then you trade him, see what your future is, but you give the opportunity for Bailey to take over next year because then you get 2 more years out of Bailey on an absolute bare bones deal.
You really think I'm asking this question.
It's not what I would do. I believe it's most likely.
But that likelihood would be, can you imagine the criticism of, because if you said, if Mac's not good, it means you don't make the playoffs. Now you're going in the next season with Bailey Zappi. The likelihood of you making the playoffs with him, probably pretty low.
Yeah, you're going to suck for a while.
And especially if they let Mac go all season if he's sucking, then everybody's saying, all right, so now we've got the starting quarterback that was the backup last year. Why didn't we switch this out halfway through? If you guys think he's good enough to be a starting quarterback now, why didn't you guys?
No, I get what you're saying, Courtney, but I'm just looking at, like, if this is the, and this, I know this is Curtis's thought process, which if Mac does stink, and you're going with Zappi next year, not only do you stink this year, you're probably not making the playoffs with Zappi the next 2 years if you're telling me that's the guy who you're going to go with. So for the next 3 years, you're a non-playoff team, and how is Robert Kraft handling that?
Well, I don't know, but here's the situation they find themselves in. If Mac is decent, Daniel Jones just got $40 million.
90.
But guaranteed.
90 guaranteed.
90 guaranteed.
Yep.
For being decent. Is there any way
Being
in hell
mediocre.
that you think that Bill Belichick and or Robert Kraft are going to put $90 million in escrow for Mac Jones?
And remember,
No shot.
Yeah.
No shot in hell. So we just have to be, unless they change, then we can adjust how we feel about what they may or may not do. But given the landscape that they have shown us and how they have treated free agency, They'll give a tight end or a receiver that's a one-ish money, sort of like a 2.5 type of wide receiver money.
Right.
And they'll give a tight end $10 million. But they're not going to give a quarterback. They didn't do it with the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
They're going to do it with Mac Jones.
Yeah,
and you just said, well, what are they going to say? Wiggy, Bill Belichick lost the greatest quarterback who went to another town and won a Super Bowl, and you brought in Cam Newton. Mm-hmm. Then you lose Cam Newton. You draft a quarterback at 15, and he has a very good year. He's an alternate for the Pro Bowl. You go to the playoffs. Then you hire two buffoons, and you ruin all that growth. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many things can you do before you don't. I mean, he's never losing his job. You agree with that?
Oh,
so,
Bill?
Yeah.
So
he'll coach, and then it'll be Bailey Zappi next year. That convince me I'm wrong, but I believe Bailey Zappi will be the starting quarterback next year.
I don't know if I can convince you that you're wrong. I'm just wondering what is. Then I would say, well, what does Robert then say next year? If his thing was, oh, we need to win a playoff game. What does he then say next year to justify keeping Bill?
But it's all performative. That's what I've accepted it as. That Robert Kraft says what his fans want to hear.
So it's lip service, in your opinion?
Well, he said there would be changes if they didn't win a playoff game. They didn't make the playoffs, and there wasn't changes.
All right.
So I don't know what else I can, I just sort of have to trust the actions over words, Wiggy. That's how I was taught.
All right.
Let's go to John and Gardner. Good morning, John.
Hey, Chris, thanks for taking the call. You all are doing a stellar job this week without the big fella, let me tell you.
Oh, thank you.
The saying, I was just saying to Jack, something about when somebody shows you who they are, believe them.
That's a Parcells line.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was Maya Angelou, but whatever.
Yeah, she wrote it.
I said this, frankly, last year, but Bill is not changing. He's shown us that he is stuck in his stubborn ways, so we've had a lot of interest, and I don't say this in a condescending way. You guys have talked about a lot of interesting details this week, but the bottom line is Bill ain't changing. He's not modifying, and it mystifies me why he can't understand why the last leg of his career he could have been viewed as changing with the times and going into the new NFL and doing well. Instead, he's staying in his old ways, and what has he shown us that's different from that? He's just stuck where he is, and everybody else be damned. And that's Bill's way of looking at things.
Yeah,
and that's the biggest thing. Is that who Bill's going to be in the final chapter of his career? Cam Newton, Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi.
Yeah, it is far more likely for me to see Bill not budging off of the quarterback stance and not giving a ton of money to a quarterback than it is for me to see him go 180 and bring in a either talented veteran quarterback that's making $30 to $50 million a year, or trading a boatload of draft capital to move up to get Caleb Williams, who then you're looking at another 2 to 3 year project. So it's like, this is why it is so mind-numbing looking back at the decision that was made, and why, to me, allowing Brady to leave is far worse than trading Babe Ruth to the Yankees, because it is the most essential component, and it is the one person that allowed the entire Belichick doctrine to exist and thrive. That is the best player taking less and elevating those around him.
Yeah.
And without that, it's just been a house of cards.
Right, and that's going to be, and that's why I said this year is going to be so interesting, because if Mac is basically what those numbers say, or even if Mac is what he was his first year, 22 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, aren't we sitting here going, all right, what are we doing for next year?
Right. We're stuck in neutral.
Right. What's the quarterback situation for next year? Because
that's why I wanted them to sign DeAndre Hopkins so badly, because he was a guy. Then Devontae Parker's a 2, and Kendrick Bourne's a 3, and then you have Gesicki, and you have an actual offense. Now you're stuck with, once again, sadly, I thought the departure of Judge and Patricia would now allow us to remove any excuses from Mac Jones's conversation. But how can you say that now? Their weapons are in the bottom 2 or 3 in the entire NFL on offense, and he doesn't have a tackle.
Right. And the quarterback is in the bottom, what? The bottom, maybe probably the bottom third of the league, bottom quarter of the league.
I would say he's perfectly. I think he's like 16.
No, I think
60. Who you
yeah.
got 60? You don't have him 60. There's been a ton of, well, not a ton, but ESPN had him somewhere between.
When I'm in this seat, I have to elevate Mac a couple spots.
Yeah.
Since Greg's been gone, you are completely off Mac
He
Island.
evicted me. He kicked me off.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I would say Mac's probably somewhere between 22 and 25.
You could say Mac's on an island right now. Dave in Nantucket, good morning.
Hey, morning, guys. Nice
Natick.
job this week with the Hillman gone.
Thanks, Dave. I'm sorry. Natick. I got Nantucket on the mind. What's on your mind?
That's right. So, Belichick, I'm a Dolphins fan, but I think Belichick still has the right strategy with a quarterback because I think at the heart of this, he doesn't believe that Mac Jones is a championship caliber quarterback. And if you look at who the best quarterbacks are in the league, certainly drafting high gives you a better chance to be selective. But very few of what we would consider elite quarterbacks right now were taken in the top 10. So there is a certain amount of got to get lucky with whoever you pick. And Curtis, you got to get off the Patriots making a mistake with Brady leaving. That team was barely playoff capable. They weren't going to get better. And Tom Brady certainly was successful in Tampa Bay, but that's because Jameis Winston threw for 5,000 yards, almost 45 touchdowns, but had 33 picks. So all he did was he played excellent football. He did his job well.
Dave, the Tampa Bay Bucks hadn't won a playoff game in 20 years. They were the losingest franchise in professional sports. Only one team was interested in Tom Brady when he left here.
But he did
and
go
they won
to
a Super Bowl.
he did go to a good team in the sense that they had everything they needed.
And Dave, what you just said is actually making my point, and I always appreciate your calls, and I think you're very well informed. The Patriots were barely a playoff team with the best player at his position in the history of the sport. You don't remove that person and then think you're going to get better. You build up the people around that person and you get as much as you can because as you're witnessing now, Dave, it's really, really, really hard to find someone either through money or luck in the draft that is capable of doing what Tom did in 2019.
Well, that's true, but I think 2019 Tom Brady was not 2009 Tom Brady. It wasn't 2015 Tom Brady where he was still at a point where just because of how great he was,
right,
he could elevate mediocre receivers to above average to excellent to legendary.
1,000%.
He wasn't that guy in 2019,
right,
2020.
Dave, but then what you do is, as an organization, you spend more around him to maintain it instead of removing him and trying to restart all over again.
Yep. But the last thing I'll leave you with is that, you mentioned Daniel Jones and quarterbacks like that are mediocre, that maybe are a flash in the pan for one season and then get $35-40 million. If anything, that's the reason I think that if you don't think you've got the guy in Mac Jones, you've got to move on from him, and if that means just trade him, bring in a veteran game manager and franchise manager for a year like a Teddy Bridgewater or something like that, then you can't sink that much of your salary cap into somebody that you think can't get you out of the first round of the playoffs if they're surrounded by an outstanding team. That just won't work.
All right, Dave, thank you. A lot of good points. Disagree on most of them, but as always, you brought it with some backup for your facts.